I wanted to ask you, this coming Sunday, you're going to start your marriage series.
Right.
So you're taking a break, which you don't do very often. Mm-hmm. Typically, you finish one book and
right.
you move to the next
So I'm
book.
out of my wheelhouse.
I know. It's a very interesting time.
Yeah.
Do you feel uncomfortable? Are you sweating a little bit?
I do a little bit. Yeah. I much prefer the Lord to just dictate what you say.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
next
it's
passage.
His word,
right.
and so that's where I think the staple is.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that there are good reasons that we're looking at marriage.
That's kind of my question for you. Why this topic? Mm-hmm. Why now? And then, since we haven't started yet, maybe you can give a little preview as to what we're going to be looking at. However much you want to divulge, however much you want to keep people in anticipation for.
Sure,
it's up to you. But yeah, why this topic? What made
biblical marriage.
I
think marriage is one of the most important things that God has established for mankind, for the fulfillment of His purposes, for their own fulfillment and satisfaction. And yet marriage has become this special target by the enemy of the gospel and is being very effective in the erosion of awareness and respect for and honor of marriage. The scriptures speak specifically in Hebrews 13 that marriage is to be held in honor by all. And we live in a culture right now that is defacing marriage in every way possible. And so we make assumptions very often about what our people understand, what they know and understand. And I think that there are seasons where it's helpful to go back to fundamentals and institutions that God has established, marriage being the initial and principle of the institutions that God has established and the purposes that God has for mankind, and reinforce them, review them, make sure people understand it. We can assume they do, but that assumption can result in disaster, and whether for the entire church or whether for an individual family. We cannot assume, I think, which is the first reason, is that we cannot and must not assume that a biblical foundation exists for the institution of marriage in the minds of all of God's people. I think, generally speaking, God's people understand that marriage is important, that, marriage is to be held in honor, but we need to provide them the evidence from Scripture that that's true, because it is being assailed, assaulted, and torn down by our culture all around us. And as that erodes, as our cultural respect and honor of marriage erodes, the concern is that may not be to the intensity that it exists in the world, but there is almost an inevitability that the church will somehow be affected by the culture around us. So I think that's important. Second reason is that I want to strengthen our marriages. We have good, solid marriages, and yet no marriage is as good as it should be. Marriage is, because two imperfect people are participating in them, they are by default imperfect, and they have room for growth. The best marriages have room for growth.
You're saying because it's two imperfect people, then by default the marriage is itself
correct.
Imperfect.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I want to strengthen that. I want to give them the fuel that will help them abound still more. And I desire to do that. At the same time, we realize that there are many marriages that are not just imperfect, but struggling.
Yeah.
People who are, as they say, a bat's whisker from throwing in a towel. And we don't
You know,
want to
I'm curious as to who they are that say that, but I think I understand the
analogy.
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I know that there are people who are struggling very much,
Yeah,
seriously struggling
Yeah.
with marriage. And I want to give them a focus on what God says about marriage. And then thirdly is I know that the culture is challenging marriage. There has been a devaluation of marriage to where essentially it's a convenience. It's an economical convenience. And the same-sex marriage proponents are saying it's not fair that heterosexual marriages get all of these financial breaks,
Right.
and we don't, right? So essentially our culture has bought in to an idea that it's essentially an economical arrangement. This is what all marriage has been reduced to. And it isn't something holy and sacred. It isn't something that God has defined and instituted. It really is, according to those that would so denigrate it and devalue it, it belongs to men. It's human possession. It is something we have the freedom and the ability to address and define and determine, when it is not. It is God's. And we are being challenged by a culture that is refusing to acknowledge that marriage is something above and beyond human establishment. It is something that has been established by God. So I want to counter cultural challenges to marriage, and make clear what marriage is supposed to be. And then fourth reason is that it's a discipleship issue. Not only the individual couple or individuals within the marriage, but it extends to the children, because the environment that the marriage creates in the home is of profound influence and impact on the children. So the better the marriage is, the better the environment in the home, the more effective parents are in teaching and training their children, the more credibility parents have in teaching and training their children. And so marriage becomes the foundation for the entire family. And then the family becomes the foundation off which the gospel is used to establish the church. So the weakest marriages create the weakest families, which create the weakest churches. And so in order to strengthen the church, you have to strengthen the family. In order to strengthen the family, you have to strengthen the marriages. And of course, you have to strengthen the individuals who are participating in the marriages as well. And so it's really a discipleship opportunity to help people develop a way of thinking that's appropriate. And then that discipleship is designed to address how people think about marriage, because how people think will help determine what they do. And so I want to help them think properly about the roles of husbands and wives, the issue of God's purposes for sexuality, the issue of companionship, how to solve problems, the honor that the scriptures declare marriages to be held in honor by all. And I want to just make sure that people are thinking clearly and biblically about those priorities. And then another one is, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, but I think it's pastoral care. It's, if you know people are struggling, I want to address that and help relieve them of that struggle to whatever degree I can. I certainly want to be of service to them. That becomes a matter that we have to be careful about. And I've resisted suggestions by people here and there, even elders. Some elders have suggested that I do series on subjects or topics and so on. And I've resisted it because the minute you do it, people have another topic that they want you to address. And I'm just wanting to be on record. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to, when I get done with this, I'm going to go back into the
everyone
scripture.
can go ahead and put their lists away.
Yeah, you can put your list away. It's not going to help. I'm going to be exegeting John. I'm going to go back into the Gospel of John when I'm done with the marriage study. And I'm going to allow God to set the agenda of what we discuss as we go through the Gospel of John. So I'm really committed to that. This is kind of an outlier in my ministry to do this.
Since I've been here, I think this is the only special series that I can think of that. That might not be true, but you maybe have done other things for like maybe 2 weeks, real briefly.
Well, I think what I usually do, and I remember the elders some time ago, a number of years ago when I was preaching through Matthew, I think I was somewhere in like Matthew 25 or 26, and they were talking about the need for messages on discipleship. And I says, well, if you can wait until I get to Matthew 28, when he gives the Great Commission, I can blow that out into a 5 or 6 part series on discipleship and have it be exegetically based. And they said, yeah, that's fine. You can do that. So they waited. And when I got there, I made it worth their wait, I think. I mean, we really hit it hard and it was a beneficial series.
It was still in the flow of
Matthew.
The gospel. Yeah,
exactly. And so that's typically how I do it. I could, John says some things about marriage, and I could wait and do it in the process of that. But I just thought, all right, I'm done with 2 Timothy.
Yeah,
I don't want to start a brand new series in August. I think because so many people are traveling.
Summer's kind of a hectic time.
Yeah, and your congregation is not as present as later in the fall. And so I wanted to start John after September starts. It'll be the 15th of September is when I begin it. The 1st of September is communion. The 8th of September is something else. I can't remember what it is, but anyway, we'll do that. And so I want to provide pastoral care to marriages that are struggling and fortify marriages. Yeah. And I suppose the last reason is I want to encourage husbands and wives to embrace the sanctification process that marriage is designed to be. It's interesting that in if you look at Ephesians 5, there is this comment on the issue of marriage that has been very interesting to me, where it talks about in verses 26 and 27. Go ahead and read that.
Yeah. I'll start in verse 25 for a little context.
Sure. Yep.
Verse 25 says, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her." And then verse 26, "that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish."
So that text tells you that one of the purposes for marriage is sanctification.
Yeah.
Right? Because the relationship between Jesus and the church, Jesus desires to sanctify the church. And the husband is to love the wife, and, not to push this too far, but I think that just speaks to the issue of washing, removing wrinkles and spots, being holy and blameless, is all the direction toward which marriage is pushing us as part of the bride of Christ. Now, understand that husbands are part of the bride of Christ even as much as wives are the bride of Christ. So God has intended marriage to be a means by which both are sanctified. And that means challenges, that means trials, that means disagreements, that means tensions, that means all of the things that bubble up to the surface that reveal your heart that marriage is designed to provide.
Yeah.
So marriage is designed to be a sanctifying influence in the lives of people, and become such when those people allow the grace of God to prevail in the midst of all of the junk that bubbles up from the tensions and disagreements and the points of view that contradict, and the just the sinful emotion that often is present within marriage. Those are all means and opportunities by which Spirit-filled people find progress and sanctification. So I want to explain that. I want people to have the opportunity to realize that the difficulty of marriage is not a result of mere faulty choices that people, I shouldn't have married this person. That was a faulty choice. I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
No. It's an opportunity for you to find the grace of God necessary in the process of sanctification, of making you, as it says here, glorious, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she, the church, should be holy and blameless. And so the husbands ought to also love their own wives as their own bodies. So there's this understanding that marriage is designed by God to be a means by which we're sanctified, made holy, made more, as it says here, blameless, by having things surface that we appropriately deal with. The problem is a lot of people don't want to appropriately deal with those things. They either want out or they want the other person to accept responsibility and blame, but they don't want to at all deal with their own sinful heart in an appropriate way. They don't want to do that, right? So I should say some don't. I mean, some really do want to do right.
Yeah.
And so they're very open and teachable. And I'm hoping I'll have a whole congregation of people just like that who are open and teachable.
Yeah.
And so those are some of the reasons that I'm doing this.
Yeah. No, I'm looking forward to it. Just because I think it is such a it's an issue that looms large in everyone's perspectives, right? Because anyone that's married can sympathize with a lot of what you're saying. And then I think, even for younger people or people that are singles and are desiring marriage, I think it's such great preparation for them as well to think about it, to not think about marriage through rose-colored lenses, but to recognize that it is such a good thing, and part of the goodness of it is the periods of difficulty in it and the way that God uses those. So I think it'll be a very beneficial series for people in all different stages and places in life.
Hopefully, I'm I'm in the Medicare age, and, that kind of thing, and I still have to work on my marriage.
Yeah,
I still do. One of the things I think that also gives me impetus and boldness to do this is that my wife has placed the Good Housekeeping seal of approval on these things. She says, I delight when you preach on marriage. When you teach on marriage, I delight in it. When you do wedding ceremonies, I delight in them, because the things that you are saying ought to be done, you're clearly striving to do. You're not perfect.
Sure. Yeah.
She says. But clearly,
she's just trying to keep you humble.
Yeah, clearly, I don't sit there and say, yeah, he ought to practice what he preaches.
Right.
She's very affirmed, very encouraged, very delighted for me to teach on the issues. And that gives me boldness, to do that. If I had a wife that says, yeah, well, I don't think you should be preaching on marriage.
Right. Or you better listen to your sermons later.
Yeah. Can you re-listen to that?
Right.
The Spirit of God was talking to you. I'm not sure you heard it, which he does all the time.
Yeah.
But, so again, I'm not trying to tout myself as this perfect husband, but I have a wife who recognizes there's integrity in what I'm teaching, which is a good thing.
Praise the Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're looking forward to it.
Amen.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Biblical marriage.
Biblical marriage.
Stay tuned.
A mess worth making.
No, that was your title. That was not my title.
I stole from a book. It's from, there's some book out there like Marriage, a mess worth making.
I bet you it's a hipster author too. But
probably they're trying to be, because the hipster would have done it better. I think.
Okay.
The hipster would have done it better.
Well, I'm just boring meat and potatoes. Biblical marriage. The first sermon title that's coming up this Sunday is The Ravaging of Marriage. And so I'm going to work hard to keep it from being a complete downer, but I'm trying to establish the problem.
Yep.
And then we'll deal with the solutions.
Very good. Well, we're looking forward to it.
Yeah.
It'll be a good
Thanks.
series.